Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my special guest, Yael Cabilly. Welcome to the show, Yael. I'm so excited to have you on and pick your brain on some really topics that are a little bit in depth, but super important for business owners. Yale is the co-founder of Cabilly and Co. and it's a law firm that specializes in trademarks, IP, patents, and all of that related specifically to e-commerce business sellers. And then also co-founder of Fortinet, which is a company that helps sellers who are looking to exit their business, which is wow, that's quite a lot, but I'm so excited for you to come on and share this with us today, Yael. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Very excited.
So the first thing I'd like to know is what inspired you to begin studying the law? What was the kind of the decision behind that?
Decision. I guess I grew up in France, and in France, you have, I think, when you're about 15, you have a kind of stage that you do, an internship that you do usually with, I don't know, your parents or friends of parents, usually a profession that you may want to do in the future, you may want to try. So I had like a short internship of like 2 weeks with my parents' friends, and it was an attorney. I remember like labor law. So I went to court. I found it cool, and then I thought, "Oh, maybe one day." So that's kind of how I got to this area. I started school after the army because I live in Israel, so here women do the army for 2 years, and once I finished, I started law school.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like that initial time that you spent doing your internship piqued your curiosity enough that that was something that you wanted to continue doing and delving into the law and different aspects of the law. And so now you're specializing in the intellectual property, trademark, and patents. And so tell us a little bit about how those things are so important. And first of all, let's maybe demystify some of those for listeners who maybe don't understand exactly what each of those things are, if you would.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's important for most companies. It doesn't really matter in which field you are. We specifically, most of our clients are actually e-commerce sellers. So for them, it's crucial because all they have is their brand or product. But if I had to divide it, I would say there's trademark, patents, and copyrights. So trademarks protect your brand. So for example, pockets of knowledge. That's a great trademark. You can add, by the way, a little TM after your brand. Nike is a brand, so the trademarks. Most people know what they are. They don't necessarily know that they have to protect them. Okay, so you have to actually apply for the registration so that you have the protection over your brand. Patents usually you also kind of heard what it is. Most people have. It's when you have an invention, you want to protect the technology. It's called a utility patent. You actually protect the way people use it or its functionality, not just an idea, but how it works. So patents as well. And then the third part, which most people actually don't really know, is copyrights. So copyrights protect text, photos, graphic designs, mostly these. Okay. So if you have a photo that you took with your iPhone, you took a picture of your son, then you own the copyrights because you took that photo. You wrote a text, even 2 paragraphs on your Facebook, you own the copyright and you don't have to register it just by in writing those or by taking the picture or by, I don't know, I have my 4-year-old draw like a Spider-Man, actually Spider-Man is not a good example, but draws, I don't know, a dog, then he would own the copyrights. So these are the three things that you see the most and that are relevant in all businesses.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for kind of clarifying those different things. And it was interesting how you kind of mentioned about the Superman drawing because then that kind of crosses lines, right? Because now you're talking about something that's probably been trademarked and so on and so forth and not
Right.
necessarily something that you would personally be able to trademark, but I didn't know that specifically about if you were to just even write something, a couple paragraphs or whatever that that was yours. But so now let's talk about how you would protect that. So let's say that then the next step is somebody maybe wants to use what you said, but you want to be attributed the rights to that. So explain
Yes.
that because I know that's another aspect of it.
Yeah. So first of all, when you write a book or when you take that picture or when you draw something, the rights are yours. No need to register, no need to do anything. And that's actually the most, I think, typical problems or mistakes that we see. So let's go to e-commerce for a second. You have a listing on Amazon, you have a page on eBay. You wrote a description of your product, right? You describe your product. I don't know, you sell a microphone, you explain how large the microphone is and how the sound is, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you have kind of bullet points. All of these that you wrote, you own the copyright. Now, if somebody else comes and just copies your bullet points or your description, you can actually file a complaint and remove them in, I don't know, 2 minutes.
Mm.
That's what it takes to file a complaint. So in that particular case, when it comes to e-commerce and platforms, you can actually file a complaint without any registration. When you go out of those platforms, sometimes you may need to file a lawsuit. So for example, I don't know, you find someone, they have a website, you approach them, you ask, hey, remove all my images from your website. They don't do anything. Then you would want to file a lawsuit. And in that particular case, although you own the rights, in order to file a lawsuit, you would need a registration of your copyrights. So to register your copyrights, if we're talking about the United States, you just file it with the Copyrights Office. So it's like copyright.gov. You can actually do it yourself. It's like $60 per work, and you would apply for it, and then a few months later you get like a kind of a registration. It's a very simple process, and it's really mostly for lawsuits. If you find online and if you have a form of complaint that you can file, if it's eBay, if it's Etsy, if it's Amazon, Google has those complaints. These are always easier, but if there are no complaints and you have to fight the infringer, then you would do it through a lawsuit.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah,
And
thank
by
you.
the way, like, going back to my example of Spider-Man, what's interesting, if we took the example of Spider-Man, there are several rights there. The word Spider-Man is a trademark. Okay, that's trademark and that's protected. It's protected for many reasons, but the biggest reason is because they filed a trademark under Spider-Man, protecting specific products under this brand, but also the image itself, the character with the red and black so this is protected by copyrights, right? There's like the graphic design is protected by copyrights and I can't just copy the design. And if we go on, maybe there's a design patent that's also protected for, for a shape of a specific product. Several types of IP, if you know them, you would know how to protect them. You would know also how to not infringe those rights. That's also something that you have to know, and that's what we try to teach sellers.
Oh, that's excellent. And that actually brings up a question for me is that so at what point would sellers want to reach out to somebody like yourself who would assist them in understanding at what point they would need to do these sorts of things?
Yes. So we meet our clients in several steps of their business. One of them would be at the beginning. You start a company, you call it Pockets of Knowledge. And then before you choose that name, you want to search and make sure that nobody has taken that name, nobody has registered that name, because if somebody did, then you would be infringing. So, with a podcast, it can be an issue, right? You can have many listeners and you start having a reputation, and then one day, boom, you get a letter. So, what we do first is conduct a search to make sure that the brand is available and that if you want, you can go ahead and register the brand as a trademark and protect it. So, first search before you choose the name. Sometimes we tell you, wrong name, go to another one. And then once we search and it's clean, we apply for a trademark. And then we often see our clients later when they have problems. So I don't know, they chose a brand that they didn't protect. So we would help them deal with the issue, sometimes negotiating a license, sometimes battling and showing that it's not it's actually not infringing. So we meet them there. We meet them when they have an idea and they want to protect it, protect the product as a patent, etc. And we meet them at the end when they exit.
Awesome. And that leads me to another question, and that's what sort of directed you to helping e-commerce sellers and business owners, and specifically like in the Amazon space and like you mentioned eBay and Etsy. What kind of prompted you to go that direction?
So it started with one seller. I helped one seller with a trademark issue, and then he asked me, "Is it okay if I write it on my group? I have like 1,000 sellers on my group." And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And then about 20 sellers came to me on that day because they saw what happened to him. It was like, "Oh no, what if it happens to me?" So I helped them, and then we had a kind of webinar and then 40 sellers. So I understood there's like something there and nobody's helping those sellers and they don't know much about intellectual property. Amazon is just suspending their accounts and listings all the time. And so I decided to start a law firm that focuses on IP and specifically e-commerce. And today we're a team of 16 people just doing that, just e-commerce and IP.
My gosh, that's awesome. It sounds like it grew just by word of mouth, really, from that one initial seller that you helped, and then it just blew up from there. So that's amazing. And what a way to succeed, right? In almost the easiest fashion is to have other people promoting your business. And then this underserved area, it sounds like you really filled a need that was there for these sellers who needed the assistance, and so that's fabulous, I love it.
Yeah, you see that. I guess if you encounter a problem and you see it more than once, then I guess something needs to be done. That case, it was, yes, I mean, for years we didn't spend a dollar on advertising because there was, such a need. I think these days you have several service providers, not lawyers actually, but there are a few that help with suspensions. Still, our combination of a kind of IP and e-commerce is an advantage. There are many brands, even very large brand that want to understand how Amazon works. How do they enforce their rights? How do they protect themselves from Amazon? It's a small niche, but there's like 4 million sellers on Amazon only today, probably more, five, six. So yeah, I guess in every profession you can find this blue ocean, this area where nobody's been before, and there's a real need. There's a real problem.
Mhm, yeah. Well, so then let's talk about how you're helping the e-commerce sellers to protect themselves and their intellectual property.
So on Amazon, for example, you have what they call the Amazon brand registry, which is a kind of protection for brands. So Amazon tells you if you don't think you're a brand and you didn't register your trademark, we do not see you as a brand. If you did and you have a trademark, come apply for the brand registry and we'll help you enforcing your rights. So they have a cool platform where you can, if somebody jumps on your listing, you can file a quick complaint and remove them. They have another program that you can actually remove them immediately by just pressing basically one button. They have another program for protecting patents. So they developed over the years several tools that help sellers. I guess the first step is to legally protect yourself. So own that patent, copyrights, trademarks, etc. Once you own them, you start enforcing it. So you start using the platform to remove malicious sellers or what we call hijackers that kind of jump on your listing and try to start to sell counterfeit products and not your product. We started protecting mostly private labels and bigger brands on Amazon and developed to Etsy and Walmart and eBay. They all have this system of protection. You need to know how the game works. You need to understand the rules. Once you do, then you can navigate it and you don't necessarily need a lawyer for the next step. It's really protecting and then kind of learning the platform.
Good point. And thank you for detailing that those different platforms do have sort of systems in place to help the sellers to protect their intellectual property, their patents and their brand. So thank you for that. And so let's talk then about what are some common mistakes maybe that e-commerce sellers are making and how would you correct for that? I mean, I suppose it depends on the mistake, right? But what are you seeing generally most commonly?
So one of the most common mistake that we see with sellers is that search that I mentioned earlier. So actually choosing a brand, doing a quick Google search, and then kind of, okay, let's do it. And then you manufacture, you start sending the products to Amazon, you start gathering reviews, and then like, okay, and it's time to protect it. Let's file for a trademark. But then at this stage, sometimes I would tell you, sorry, this cannot be trademarked because it's already taken. Somebody has already trademarked this, or somebody has already trademarked something similar that blocks you. So, not necessarily identical, even something similar could block you. And then what do? You cannot change your brand on Amazon. You can't. So, what you have to do is actually reopen a new listing with a new brand and kind of do it all over again. So, what we recommend is that sellers actually, choose one, two, or three potential brands. Go do a search, ask your attorney to do it. By the way, it doesn't cost more because usually they would retract that cost from the registration that you do later. So ask your attorney to conduct a search. They tell you yes, and then you can manufacture, and then later or immediately you can file for a trademark. So that's a common mistake. And it's crucial when it happens when you have like 600 reviews or 200 reviews that you invested a lot of money to get there and then you have to do it all over again. So it's hard. Or you can say, okay, I won't have a trademark. I'm infringing. I'm continuing with this brand. But then at the end of the road, nobody will buy your business. So strongly recommend conducting the search. And then another mistake that we see, and that takes us back to what I explained about copyrights. A lot of people rely on their supplier when it comes to the design, and so you have, for example, you manufacture paper plates with a cool dog on, or I don't know, a laughing cat or something, a jumping cat that you see there, and that your supplier suggested to you. Okay, so he just showed you the inventory of product that they have, and you can choose. But then in the catalog, I mean, these are not necessarily designs that your supplier has designed. And sometimes it was a client from the past. And then you start selling those paper plates and you get a complaint and somebody suspends your listing from Amazon. So you don't want to get there. If you want to sell paper plates with jumping cats, I don't know why you would do that, but if you really want to, then have your own graphic designers, just take someone even from Fiverr. It's not very expensive and design your own. Not only you won't be infringing any copyrights, but you would also be owner of copyrights because remember, like you produce something that's yours, even if you haven't filed a copyright. So these are the two most common mistakes. I mean, they sometimes take other people's graphic designs. Sometimes they just take two or three sentences from another listing. They didn't know that it's not allowed. Or sometimes they take an image from Google because they thought that it's okay because it's on the internet, but it's not. You can't take any image from anyone. So just use your own photographer, use your own graphic designer, write your own sentences. There's Chat GPT these days that can write for you. Then you won't be infringing any copyrights.
Those are some great points. So thank you very much for sharing those. And it really seems like doing that extra step in the beginning really saves you in the long run by doing those searches as you suggested, making sure that you're not using a name that's similar to somebody else's name or exactly like somebody else's name. You're going to save yourself so many headaches down the line. And so that's fantastic. And then something that you brought up in there was once you get to the point when you're ready to sell, you may not be able to because if you've used somebody else's name, that's gonna be a big, like, red
Right.
flag, and somebody's not gonna be wanting to purchase your company because you don't have the rights to the images or the names or logos or whatever that, you maybe thought you could use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine you're a buyer and you want to buy an e-commerce business. Which business would you buy? The one that has a protected brand, that can fight any hijacker, any infringer, anyone, or a brand that sells well on Amazon or Shopify or whatever, but the brand isn't protected. And not only that, it cannot be protected because somebody else has protected it. You're actually infringing a trademark. Which one would you choose? You choose the one that's protected. So that's kind of the first requirement of most buyers, protected trademark. And speaking, by the way, of mistakes, many sellers protect their trademark for the first product that they do. Okay, because a trademark is not general, it protects certain products. So, for example, Nike is protected in class 25 in relation to clothing, I don't know, socks and shoes. Okay, but they're not protected for watches. Maybe they are for watches, but not for restaurants, for example. So with Nike, they're so famous that you can't use it for restaurants. But with any other trademark, you can actually, if it's protected in one category, you can use it in another category. So the most common mistake, one of the most common mistakes that we see, they protect it once for one product, but then they sold, I don't know, the microphone earlier, but now 2 years later, they switched to beauty and they sell deodorants or makeup, and that's in a completely different category. But the trademark is still for microphones, and that's a different class. It means that you're not protected for the other products that you actually sell, and that's a problem. Again, going back to exits, nobody will buy your deodorant business if it's protected for microphones. So remember to refresh and think about trademarking every time you have at least a new category.
Oh, excellent. Great point, and never would have thought of that, honestly, because you do sort of think like, "I've got the trademark, that's it, it's done." But, like, as you just explained, that wouldn't apply in a completely different category. And obviously, like you mentioned, Nike, is a huge, huge brand, and they pretty much have the market covered on that in whatever area you try to go in because 'cause they're so huge. But when you're talking about a smaller seller, individual that's running a smaller company, that wouldn't hold water, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we finish this podcast, I imagine you like searching for pockets of knowledge and then applying for the trademark and adding your little TM. By the way, I just explained this morning, when do you use the little TM and when do you use the circled R? So TM you can use whenever you have a brand that you invented, it's yours, and you use it as a trademark, and maybe you have conducted the search to make sure you're not infringing, you can already add the TM even before you file for a trademark. So today, this afternoon, you can add your little TM. The circled R, you can only add it when you've registered the brand. So when you completed the registration, that can take a year to complete.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying those 2 points. And, I had no idea that that length of time could be up to a year before your registered trademark could be processed. And just to speak on the point about searching, when I was getting ready to launch the podcast, I actually went through almost 100 names,
Wow.
searching for who was on the internet already, any kind of variation of a name. Was the URL available? Or was it
Mhm.
already used? And so I went through a very long search process to make sure that that name wasn't already being used. However, brought up the point about something similar, and there is a podcast that is similar in name that is not active. However, they were using it before. So that brings up a question for me, and that I'm using this name now
Yeah.
and it's a variation. So what does that imply if they decided to, continue their
Right.
podcast with the
Yes,
similar name?
that's not the 101, that's advanced trademark, but I'll tell you quickly. So the question is, have they trademarked it or not? If they haven't filed for a trademark and they just used it and you're now using it and they haven't been using it for like 3, 4 years, your risk is very low and you may well get a trademark in the future. And, if they try to resist, it's going to be a little hard if they haven't used it for a while. If they have filed a trademark, then the trademark may still be live because they survive a lot of time. It's like 6 years and then additional 4. So sometimes you would actually have to file for a cancellation of their trademark based on non-use. Okay. So if you don't use a trademark for 3 years, you kind of lose the rights over that trademark. So you would actually have to actively cancel their trademark so that you can file yours. Sorry, advanced trademark.
No, that's okay, and thank you for kind of answering my question, and it is a little bit above our conversation, and we can certainly carry that on, offline, but I appreciate you taking the time to kind of explain some of that. So that leads me to the question of what would you say you really wished e-commerce sellers or business owners knew going forward?
Yeah, I guess if I could go one by one, is like know the three basics. I have this lecture that I do. I thought about just recording it so that anyone could just open it and have 30 minutes, kind of know what trademarks, patents, design patents, and copyrights are, and then you would know once you really know what they are, how to avoid infringement and when to protect it. But as a starter, you can just keep in mind that when I have a brand, I have to make sure I'm not stepping on anyone's toe. When I'm designing a product, I want to make sure I'm not infringing any patent there. And then when I'm writing content or having photos, I want to make sure that I'm not stepping on anyone's copyright. So I'm not copying anyone else. If you are creative and you invent your brand, you invent your text, and you created a whole new product that doesn't exist, your chances to infringe are low, and you would be in the protecting zone. So my advice would be in the patent area, you have 1 year from the moment that you created that patent, that you created the special design of your bottle. That's a design patent. So just remember you have 1 year in the United States. In other countries, you have to actually protect it before you publish it. So have that in mind if you created something new. If you just, took another product that many other people have sold, you have to think about, am I not infringing? So these are the two. You need to understand where you are, but at least have this in mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's interesting. I had no idea the difference between the US and other countries in terms of the length of time that you had before you had to get a patent filed. So that's good to know.
And then many countries like China, you have to do it in advance. So difficult there.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. And, this brings up something for me and that you actually are ranked, what is it, top 50 trademark attorneys. And I want to know, like, how did you get there? What led to that? How did that come about?
Yeah, you've done your research. Because we represent many sellers, sellers work fast and there's a lot of them. So what happened is that we file 3, 4 per day trademarks, and sellers want a fast response. They want it fast. And then since we work with many of them, the success rate is extremely important, at least for us as a law firm. So what happened is that when they did that research, they have like this AI tool that scan all the trademark lawyers and all their applications. They were looking for lawyers that file a lot and that have a high success rate and fast registrations. And that's us because we work with these sellers. There's no way, if there's one that's not happy, it's social media, everybody knows. So we will never file a trademark that we haven't searched in advance and that we know would pass. So we have like 96% success rate as opposed to other firms that have like 60 or 63 in average. So there's another, by the way, online lawyers, I think in those 50, and then all the others are kind of AIG or other like the big brands. But I guess it's because of the type of clients that we serve. It needs to be fast, needs to be successful, and there's many of them, thankfully.
That's excellent. And I love that you said that you are doing your research ahead of time so that you know you're going to be successful for your clients and getting those accepted. So that's why you're successful because you're doing like you're suggesting to other people, you're doing that research in advance to make sure that you're going to get it through for them. And so that's excellent.
Yeah, you do research, and then we also won't file if it won't pass. And that's, as attorneys, we see many attorneys filing a trademark. They know it won't pass. They know that they would fight it. And fighting is, more money for lawyers. On our side, we work on high volume. We need a client that doesn't get the trademark is not happy. It doesn't matter if you told them 5 times. Even if you told them in advance, they won't be happy. So we just don't want file it. we're obsessed about the success rate, and it's just not worth it. We've tried in the past. If you won't pass, it won't pass. Sometimes it's borderline, so you may want to try and take the risk. And sometimes there are surprises, trademark that simply don't pass, but that's luckily a small percentage.
Well, thank you for expanding on that a little bit. And then I wanted to ask you, have there been some challenges and some setbacks in this journey that you've been on? And if there have, what have you done to kind of overcome or work around some of those challenges?
Our challenges, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, I guess in the first 2 years of the law firm, we were overwhelmed. It was very hard to reply to everyone because, like I told you, there were no other attorneys. And so we were the place to go still today. But today we're a big team, we have processes. So I think for me at the beginning, at some point, I think on the first year, you could find posts on some groups. Can you recommend an attorney for e-cars? Not Yael Cabilly because she's not answering. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, yeah. So that was very difficult. Today it doesn't happen. Thank God. We have processes, we have systems. It can happen, but it's very rare that you reach out. I don't reply and nobody replies. It's rare. But that was a big challenge, and I guess good challenge, right? But it can kill a company if you don't grow, if you don't scale fast enough.
And so it sounds like what you did is get those systems in place. And I'm assuming that you brought in more staff to assist with all of the processing and handling the different clients and their needs in order to, get around that challenge of being overwhelmed with as many sellers as were coming at you. So it sounds like it was a good challenge and it pushed you to the success level that you're at now.
Yeah, I think what was really difficult is when you open a trademark firm, you can find trademark lawyers. When you open an e-commerce firm, there are no other e-commerce firms. So you have to train them. And the training can take 7 months or 8 months. It depends on the person, but it takes time. So it took us time we hired ahead of time. We sometimes hired before, just in preparation of the growth. So it took time to get there, I think. Now we have even training processes, so, it goes faster, and most of our team is already very solid and has a lot of experience. So they can support others that would join now.
Mm, yeah. So tell us a little bit on the fortunate side and how that kind of came about in terms of assisting sellers when they're ready to exit their business. Was it just kind of a natural, byproduct of what you were doing initially, or how did that come to be?
Yes and no. I think as the law firm grew, the clients grew. So at the beginning, you were speaking with smaller sellers, and then with time, their businesses grew. And we started dealing with businesses of, two, three, $5 million, and with time, 10 and 20 and $50 million. And these businesses wanted to exit. And back in 2018, which is almost 5 years ago, many clients of the law firm wanted to exit. And we saw that there were several brokers in this industry, but nobody really holding their hands and kind of taking the full process and running a competitive process to make sure that they get the maximum. And Michal, who's my partner and the CEO of Fortinet, we sat together and she said, let's, start an investment bank. So not just brokerage, but really an in-depth process that really tells the story of that brand to sell it at the maximum. So that's how we started the company. Then a third partner joined, Omri, who was a seller. And today at Fortinet, we're a team of 40 people doing just that, selling e-commerce businesses. And we're proud of the valuations that we get. We're obsessed about the valuations, so always pushing it higher and higher. Yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds really exciting what you're doing there to help those sellers really get the most out of their business because you spend all of your time building it and growing it. So, of course, you're going to want the most return out of it when you're ready to sell. So, that's awesome that the work that you're doing there for them as well. So, thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah. It's your baby. You grow your business, you sell it once. You want to make sure you sell it for the maximum. And sometimes the difference can be millions. You know, if you sell it to one buyer that knocked on your door and suggested $3 million, what if it's worth five? What if somebody offered 10 and it's worth 15? And what if it's worth twice? We've had that as well. So the process of going to, instead of one buyer, going to dozens, maybe hundreds sometimes of buyers and receiving, I don't know, 12 offers and then negotiating with all of them, that's a different outcome than speaking with one or two that a certain person can do. And you really have to present the business, know how to present the advantages of the business so that it's fully evaluated and the buyer knows what they're buying and gives the best value.
Mm, yeah, awesome. Well, I have enjoyed our conversation so much, Yael. Thank you for really going into such detail and depth on the different trademarks, the intellectual property, patents, and some of the rules and, the processes of that. And so there's something that I wanted to ask you about, like, where would people be able to find out more about how to apply for trademarks or patents or protect their intellectual property?
So on our website, you have the content part. Our website is e-cabilly.com. And then you would have our content. So we have like a nice blog where we explain every time, like, things you need to know around IP and e-commerce. We also started recently a podcast about the legal sides of e-commerce. So you can find it there on our website too.
Oh, that's awesome. And so speaking of that, what I always like to do is ask my guests if there's any books or podcasts that they've read or listening to or reading right now that they'd like to share with the listeners that would be beneficial. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us now, if there's some books or what the name of the podcast is, and then I'll include that in the show notes.
Traction. Have you heard about the book Traction? I'm probably not the first to mention it. I'm probably the last to read it. I've read it. It's a book that actually many founders and entrepreneurs in our area, Amazon sellers or e-commerce sellers in general, they use it in the management. So I think they take the, management of companies concepts, different concepts. Some of them are very complex and they make it so simple to understand. I read it on my way to work. I was listening to the book, and every time I'm like, yeah, I should do that. And then I arrived to, and I'm like, I'm all motivated. And I arrived to the office. I was like, let's do this. So I find it very inspiring and very clear. I think any manager, whether it's a founder, a CEO, or a manager of a small team, super helpful. I've actually listened to it several times. So highly recommended. Traction.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then you mentioned your podcast. And so what is the name of that?
It's e-comply, like e-com and comply. Yeah.
That's nice. I love it. Good use of the combination of the 2 words together, and I'll include that in the show notes as well. And so if listeners have any questions, maybe a little bit more in depth from our conversation, what would be the best way to connect with you and maybe get some of those questions answered?
Facebook, email, Yael at e-cabilly.com. Happy to help. You'll find me. I'll reply.
Thank you again, Yael. I appreciate your time and for you to come on the show and share your knowledge and information with all of us. So very much appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. That was fun. Thanks very much.
Awesome. We'll talk soon.
Bye. Bye. Bye.